The great rift tore the galaxy in half, and the planet of Ophiuchus Gamma began to die immediately. The psychic scream from the tear in reality killed every astropath in the capital city within seconds. Their minds burned out. The governor lost all contact with the wider Imperium. Ships in orbit went blind because they could no longer see the Astronomicon. They drifted off course and crashed into the massive hive cities below, or floated into the void to be lost forever. On the surface, the sky turned a bruised purple. Ash fell like snow. The feudal serfs working the agri-fields did not understand warp mechanics or navigational failures. They only knew that the sun looked sick and the crops were turning into black sludge. The local priest told the people to pray louder. The overseers whipped the workers harder. It changed nothing. The barrier between the physical world and the realm of nightmares had grown thin. The scent of fear and blood drew predators from the other side. 3 weeks after the sky broke, the first demonic incursions began in the northern mountain ranges. These were not massive armies. They were small tears in reality. Packs of lesser demons, red and angry, slipped through the veil to hunt. They sought skulls and blood. The planetary defense forces were too slow. Their tanks were old and their command structure was frozen by panic. The bureaucracy demanded forms be signed before ammunition could be released. By the time the generals authorized the deployment of the heavy guard regiments, 6 provinces had already been butchered. The blood from the slaughter soaked into the ground and acted as a beacon. It called more monsters. The strategic situation collapsed from a planetary defense into a series of isolated massacres. The governor locked himself in his spire and waited for the end. A single strike cruiser from the Adeptus Sororitas, the Order of the Valorous Heart, was passing through the subsector when the rift expanded. They were not there to save the planet. They were there to secure a holy relic from a mountain shrine before the world was lost entirely. Canoness Verity led the mission. She knew the planet was doomed. Her mission parameters were strict. Land, secure the reliquary of St. Katerina, and extract. Civilians were considered acceptable collateral damage. The sisters dropped in drop pods, slamming into the snow-covered peaks near the village of the charcoal burners. The village was known for high-quality fuel, but today it was known only for death. The sensors on the Canoness's armor detected high levels of warp energy. The smell of sulfur and copper was strong. The sisters moved through the village in a combat wedge formation. They expected resistance. They expected cultists or demons. They found silence. The houses were smashed. Bodies lay in the snow, frozen and torn apart. It was a massacre, typical of Khornate demons. No one had survived. The snow was stained pink and red. The Canoness checked her Auspex scanner. It pulsed with a strange reading. It was not the chaotic static of the warp. It was a steady, rhythmic signal. It felt like a heartbeat. She signaled her squad to hold fire. They advanced toward the center of the village square. In the center of the square lay the corpse of a bloodletter. The demon was dissolving into warp stuff, its physical form unstable now that it was dead. But it had not been killed by a bolter shell or a chainsword. Its head had been severed clean off. The cut was perfect. It was a single stroke that had passed through the demon's iron-hard neck bone without shattering. Next to the dissolving monster sat a boy. He looked no older than 15 Terran Standard years. He wore the rough, checkered howry of a charcoal maker. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. In his hands he held a black iron hatchet, the kind used to chop wood, but the edge was glowing with a faint, heatless light. He was unconscious. Behind him was a wooden box. Inside the box, a younger girl slept, but her skin was pale and her veins pulsed with a dark, unnatural energy. The Canoness raised her bolter. The boy was an anomaly. The girl was clearly tainted. Protocol demanded immediate execution. The canoness placed her finger on the trigger. Then she hesitated. The Auspex did not read the boy as a psyker. It read him as a blank space where the warp simply ceased to exist. He was not casting a spell. He was enforcing reality. She lowered her weapon. The history of the sector was about to change. The cell on the strike cruiser, Saint's Lament, was cold and smelled of sterile iron. There were no windows. The only light came from a single lumen strip that buzzed with a dying electrical hum. Tanjiro Kamado woke up on a metal slab. His head throbbed. He reached for his sword, but his hands grasped only empty air. He sat up quickly. The movement made him dizzy. He looked around. The room was small. The walls were covered in etched script, words he could not read, but which made his eyes hurt to look at. He checked his body. He was wearing a grey sackcloth tunic, rough against his skin. His wounds had been dressed with a stinging yellow paste and covered in synth skin patches. He was alive. His next thought was of the box. He looked around the cell frantically. There was no box. There was no Nezuko. Panic seized him. He rushed to the heavy blast door and pounded on it. The metal was thick and cold. He shouted for his sister. His voice echoed in the small space. He smelled the scent of old blood and heavy incense coming from the other side of the door. He smelled fear, but it was distant. He smelled the metallic tang of oil and machinery. He took a deep breath to calm himself. He used the recovery breathing technique. Oxygen flooded his blood. His heart rate slowed. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He could smell Nezuko. She was near. Her scent was faint, masked by the smell of wax and burning parchment. But she was on this ship. She was alive. The door hissed. Hydraulic locks disengaged with a sound like a heavy exhale. The door slid open. 2 warriors stood there. They were tall, encased in power armor that was painted black, with white robes draped over the pauldrons. They held bolters across their chests. Their faces were hidden behind helmets that looked like medieval visors. Between them stood a woman with a severe face. She wore carapace armor and a white hood. She held a data slate in one hand and a neuronic whip in the other. This was Sister Superior Agatha. She looked at Tanjiro with eyes that held no pity, only calculation. She spoke in low Gothic. Tanjiro did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was a command. He did not move. He pointed to the hallway and made a shape with his hands, a box. Agatha narrowed her eyes. She tapped a rune on her collar. A servo skull floated into the room, hovering at eye level. It spoke in a mechanical, grinding voice, translating her words into a dialect that was close enough to Tanjiro's archaic tongue for him to understand. The machine said that the prisoner would submit to testing. If he resisted, he would be purged. If he was found to be a heretic, he would be purged. If he was useless, he would be purged. Tanjiro understood. He asked about the box. The servo skull translated his question. Agatha did not smile. She said the artifact was in containment. Its fate depended on his utility. They marched him through the corridors of the ship. The floor was grated steel. Steam vented from pipes overhead. Servitors, half man and half machine, shuffled past them carrying crates of ammunition. They did not look at Tanjiro. Their eyes were replaced with lenses and their minds had been scrubbed blank. Tanjiro felt the deep sadness for them. He smelled no emotion from them, only the rote programmed impulses of a machine. It was a fate worse than death. The ship was a cathedral of war. Statues of martyrs lined the halls. Skulls were everywhere. They were carved into the walls, mounted on poles, and etched into the floor plates. It was a culture obsessed with death. They arrived at the Apothecarion. It was a medical bay that looked more like a torture chamber. Hospitallers moved between tables, tending to the wounded sisters who had survived the drop. Tanjiro saw terrible wounds, limbs missing, armor fused to skin by plasma burns. The sisters did not scream. They prayed. Their discipline was absolute. Agatha pushed Tanjiro toward a bioscanner. A hospitaller named Sister Viridian approached. She had mechanical mechadendrites extending from her backpack, tipped with needles and sensors. She told Tanjiro to stand still. The examination was thorough and invasive. They took blood samples. They measured his bone density. They scanned his brain activity. Tanjiro focused on his breathing. He maintained a state of total concentration constant. It was the only way to manage the stress. Sister Viridian watched the monitors with growing confusion. She tapped the glass of the display. She spoke to Agatha. The servo skull did not translate this part, but Tanjiro could smell their confusion. His physiology was baseline human, but his performance metrics were impossible. His oxygen efficiency was 300% higher than a standard guardsman. His muscle fibers were denser. His reaction time, measured by the twitch response in his eyes, was on par with a transhuman initiate, though he lacked the gene seed organs. Viridian asked him what he was. Tanjiro said he was the eldest son of a charcoal burner. The machine translated this. The sisters exchanged glances. They did not believe him. In the Imperium, power came from genetic modification, cybernetics, or the warp. To be simply human and yet superior was suspicious. They tested him for psychic corruption. They brought in a Psy-tracker, a cage containing a small, shivering creature that whined when it read, sensed the warp. The creature ignored Tanjiro completely. He was psychically inert. He was clean. This confused them even more. A human who could kill a bloodletter with a hatchet but had no psychic gift and no genetic enhancement was an anomaly. Canoness Verity entered the room. The other sisters snapped to attention. Verity looked tired. Her armor was scarred from the fighting on the surface. She looked at the data on the screens. She looked at Tanjiro. She dismissed the others, leaving only Agatha and the servo skull. Verity spoke plainly. She told Tanjiro that the planet Ophiuchus Gamma was collapsing. The Great Rift had vomited forth a legion of Daemons. The Imperial Guard regiments were broken. The planetary governor was dead. Her mission was to retrieve the reliquary of St. Katerina and leave, but the extraction zone was overrun. She needed every weapon she could find. She made him an offer. He would fight for the Order. He would use his strength to clear a path to the extraction zone. In exchange, she would not jettison the box into the local star. Tanjiro asked if he could carry the box. Verity refused. The box would remain on the ship under guard. If Tanjiro tried to escape, they would burn the box. If he betrayed them, they would burn the box. If he died, they would burn the box. It was a cruel bargain, but Tanjiro had no leverage. He smelled the truth in her words. She was not malicious. She was pragmatic. She would do exactly what she said. He agreed. They took him to the armory. A tech priest with a metal face presented him with weapons. They offered him a laser gun. Tanjiro did not know how to use it. They offered him a chainsword. He held it. It was heavy and unbalanced. The roaring motor disrupted his focus. It was a clumsy weapon, designed for hacking and tearing, not for the precise lines of water breathing. He shook his head. He asked for a sword, a simple blade. The tech priest grumbled in binary code. He rummaged through a pile of confiscated weapons taken from local planetary defense officers. He produced a power sword, But the power cell was dead. It was just a sharp piece of hyperdense plasteel now. Tanjiro took it. It was lighter than he was used to, but the balance was good. He swung it. The air whistled. It would do. The drop pods were prepared. Tanjiro was not given power armor. He was given a flak vest and a rebreather mask. He was assigned to Squad Domenica, a unit of battle sisters who had lost 3 members in the last engagement. Sister Superior Domenica was a veteran with a scar running from her eye to her jaw. She looked at Tanjiro with contempt. To her, he was a savage, a penal conscript who should have been executed. She told him to stay in front and catch bullets. That was his job. Tanjiro nodded. He tied his checkered hari over the flak vest. It was the only piece of home he had left. The drop was violent. The pod screamed as it entered the atmosphere. The heat was intense. Tanjiro braced his legs and breathed. The other sisters chanted a litany of protection. The pod slammed into the earth with the force of a meteorite. The doors blew open. The sound of war rushed in. It was a deafening roar of explosions, screaming, and the wet thud of organic matter hitting armor. They had landed in the ruins of a manufactorum complex. The sky was red. The air was thick with ash and the smell of ozone. Squad Domenica moved out. They were in a trench line that ran along the edge of a massive cooling tower. The enemy was ahead. They were not demons this time. They were cultists. Thousands of traitor guard and local workers who had been driven mad by the warp. They charged across the killing fields in human waves, screaming praise to the blood god. The sisters opened fire. Their bolters barked with a rhythmic, explosive thud. Mass reactive shells tore into the cultists, blowing bodies apart. Tanjiro watched. The carnage was horrifying. These had been people once. Now they were meat for the grinder. Domenica ordered an advance. They needed to secure the cooling tower to prevent the reactor from going critical. If the reactor blew, the relic they came for would be vaporized. They climbed out of the trenches. The cultists had set up a heavy stubber position in a bunker ahead. Bullets chewed up the ground. A sister to Tanjiro's left was hit. The round punched through her armor and she fell without a sound. The squad was pinned. Domenica shouted for a grenade, but the angle was bad. Tanjiro smelled the opening. The thread of the battle appeared to him. It was a faint line of tension connecting the gunner to the trigger. He took a deep breath. Oxygen surged into his legs. He moved. To the sisters, he was a blur. He did not run like a soldier. He flowed like water. He dipped under the stream of bullets. He pushed off a piece of rubble and vaulted over a crater. The heavy stubber tracked him, but he was already gone from the targeting reticle. He reached the bunker in 3 seconds. He did not hack. He slashed. The second form. Water wheel. He spun his body in a vertical circle. The dead power sword cut through the barrel of the heavy stubber and the neck of the gunner in one motion. The firing stopped. Squad Domenica advanced. They secured the bunker. The sisters looked at Tanjiro. They did not cheer. They checked their ammunition. Domenica walked up to him. She looked at the severed gun barrel. It was sheared clean, as if cut by a laser. She looked at Tanjiro's sword. It was chipped, but intact. She grunted. It was an acknowledgement of competence, nothing more. In the 41st millennium, competence was the only currency that mattered. They pushed deeper into the complex. The resistance grew stiffer. They encountered traitor Astartes. 2 World Eaters clad in blood-red power armor rampaged through the lines. They were giants, monsters of ceramite and muscle. They wielded chain axes that buzzed with a hateful hunger. The sisters focused their fire, but the bolter rounds detonated harmlessly against the thick armor of the traitors. The World Eaters laughed, a deep, wet sound. They charged. One of them caught her sister with a backhand swing, shattering her chest plate and sending her flying into a wall. Domenica ordered a retreat to a defensible position. They could not fight Astartes in the open. Tanjiro saw the fear in the sisters' movements. They were brave, but they knew they were outmatched. The World Eaters were too fast, too strong. Tanjiro smelled the scent of the lead Astartes. It was the smell of old, dried blood and rotting anger. It was overpowering. But under the anger, there was a gap. The Astartes was arrogant. He swung wide, relying on his armor to absorb hits. Tanjiro stepped forward. He did not retreat. Domenica shouted at him to fall back. He ignored her. He centered his stance. He breathed. Total concentration. Fourth form, striking tide. He launched himself at the giant. The World Eater saw him. The giant laughed and swung his chain axe down to split the little human in two. Tanjiro did not block. He twisted his body in midair, flowing around the axe. He was inside the giant's guard. The power sword was useless against the ceramite chest plate. Tanjiro knew this. He aimed for the joints. He slashed the back of the knee joint. The blade bit into the soft armor seal. The Astartes roared and buckled. Tanjiro used the giant's own knee as a springboard. He leaped up, landing on the World Eater's backpack. The second World Eater fired his bolt pistol. Tanjiro deflected the bolt round with his sword. The impact numbed his arm, but the water style redirected the kinetic energy. He spun and drove his blade into the neck seal of the first Astartes. He pushed with everything he had. The blade slid between the helmet and the gorget. The giant went rigid. Tanjiro kicked off, backflipping away as the massive body crashed to the ground. The second World Eater stopped laughing. He looked at his fallen brother. Then he looked at Tanjiro. The giant roared, a sound that shook the dust from the ceiling. He charged, but this time he was cautious. He did not swing wide. He used his combat speed. He was fast, faster than Tanjiro. The chain axe grazed Tanjiro's side, tearing through the flak vest and slicing skin. Tanjiro gasped. The pain was sharp. He rolled away, blood dripping onto the concrete. The Astartes closed in for the kill. Suddenly, a melter beam hissed through the air. It struck the World Eater in the shoulder, melting through the pauldron and vaporizing the flesh underneath. Canoness Verity had arrived with the heavy weapons team. The Astartes staggered. The sisters poured fire into the wound. The giant fell, overwhelmed by the volume of fire. Verity walked over to the corpse and put a bolt round through its head to be sure. She looked at Tanjiro. He was holding his side, using his breathing to clot the blood. The wound was closing visibly. It was not instantaneous regeneration, but it was unnaturally fast. Verity saw this. She saw the dead World Eater. She saw the clean cut in the neck seal. She realized then that she had not found a penal conscript. She had found a living weapon. She signaled the apothecary to tend to him. She did not say thank you. She said, "Can you stand?" Tanjiro nodded. "Good," she said. "We are moving out." They reached the reliquary 3 hours later. It was a small shrine located in the center of the Manufactorum's administrative block. The building was untouched by the shelling, protected by void shields that were powered by the shrine's own generator. The sisters breached the door. Inside, the air was cold and still. In the center of the room, on a plinth of marble, sat a small bone box, the reliquary of Saint Caterina. Verity approached it with reverence. She knelt and offered a prayer. As she touched the box, the air in the room changed. The temperature dropped. The shadows lengthened. The smell of ozone vanished, replaced by the smell of rotting flowers. A laughter echoed in the room. It was not the angry roar of corn. It was the seductive, whispering laughter of Slanesh. The shadows peeled away from the walls. Daemonettes. They were lithe, purple-skinned monstrosities with claws for hands. There were dozens of them. They had been waiting. It was an ambush. The sisters formed a defensive circle around the canoness. They fired, but the demonettes were fast. They moved with a supernatural grace that made them hard to track. They leapt over the bolt of fire, landing in the midst of the squad. The fight became a brawl. Chainswords clashed against crab-like claws. Sisters died, their throats slit before they could scream. Tanjiro fought back-to-back with Domenica. He was a whirlwind. 8th form. Waterfall Basin. He struck vertically, creating a wall of slashes that kept the demons at bay. His sword, though not a power weapon, was hurting them. His will was enforcing reality, making the steel bite into their warp-stuffed flesh. But there were too many. A demonette knocked the reliquary from Verity's hands. The bone box skittered across the floor. The demon lunged for it. If they corrupted the relic, the mission was a failure. Tanjiro saw the thread. He broke formation. He dove for the box. A demonette intercepted him, its claws raking across his back. He shouted in pain but did not stop. He grabbed the reliquary. The demon was on top of him. It raised a claw to pierce his heart. Tanjiro looked into its eyes. They were black voids of excess. He felt a wave of psychic pressure, a command to give up, to indulge in the pain. He rejected it. He headbutted the demon. His forehead, hard as stone, cracked the demon's skull. The creature reeled back. Tanjiro scrambled to his feet, clutching the reliquary. "Get back," Verity shouted. She pulled the pin on a crack grenade. She was going to collapse the ceiling. It was a suicide tactic. Better to bury the relic than let it be taken. Tanjiro looked at the ceiling. He looked at the sisters. He looked at the demons. He smelled the structural weakness in the archway above the entrance. He did not need a grenade. He needed a precise hit. He inhaled. Total concentration. 10th form. Constant flux. He charged toward the archway. With each step, his momentum grew. He slashed the stone pillars supporting the arch. 1, 2, 3 strikes. The stone groaned. The archway collapsed, bringing tons of ferrocrete down between the sisters and the demon horde. Dust filled the room. The screaming of the demons was muffled by the wall of rubble. The sisters were safe for the moment, but they were trapped in the shrine with no exit. Verity lowered her grenade. She looked at Tanjiro. He was covered in dust and blood. He handed her the reliquary. She took it. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "You trapped us," Domenica said, her voice angry. "There is no way out." "There is," Tanjiro said, pointing to a grate in the floor. "I can smell fresh air coming from below. Ventilation shafts." Verity stared at him. He had saved the relic. He had saved her squad. He had fought Astartes and demons and lived. And he was still just a boy in a checkered coat. She made a decision then. She clipped the reliquary to her belt. "Open the grate," she ordered. "Trooper Kamado, take point." It was the first time she had used his name. It was not a promotion. It was a designation of ownership. He was now an asset of the Order. They descended into the dark, leaving the trapped demons scratching at the rubble above. The journey back to the extraction point was a nightmare of tunnels and ambushes, but they made it. The Thunderhawk gunship picked them up as the sun began to set. The planet was burning. From the air, Tanjiro could see the scale of the destruction. Entire cities were on fire. The shape of the continents was being rewritten by orbital bombardment. He sat near the ramp, looking down. He felt small. In his world, a demon was a threat to a village or a mountain. Here, demons ate worlds. They returned to the Saint's Lament. The hangar bay was busy. Medics took the wounded. Tanjiro was left standing alone by the ramp. Verity spoke to a high-ranking priest, a confessor with cybernetic eyes. She gestured to Tanjiro. The confessor looked at him with distaste. "A mutant?" the confessor asked. "A sanction," Verity corrected. "He is effective against the archenemy. His physiology is stable. He is resistant to warp corruption." "And the baggage?" the confessor asked, referring to the box in the secure hold. "Contained," Verity said. "We will deliver the reliquary to Ophelia the Seventh. The boy and his baggage will come with us. If he falters, we execute him. If the baggage stirs, we burn it. Until then, he is useful." Verity walked over to Tanjiro. She threw a bundle at him. He caught it. It was a uniform. Not the rags of a penal conscript, but the fatigues of an armsman of the order. "Clean yourself up," she said. "You have training at 6 o'clock. Tanjiro held the uniform. He bowed, a reflex from his old life. Verity did not bow back. She turned and walked away. Tanjiro went to the barracks. He did not sleep immediately. He went to the secure hold. The guards would not let him enter, but they let him stand by the door. He placed his hand on the metal. He breathed. He could smell Nezuko inside. She was sleeping. She was safe. He sat down outside the door, his back against the cold steel. He closed his eyes. He was a soldier now. A soldier in an army he did not understand, fighting a war that had no end. But as long as he drew breath, he would fight. He would find a cure. He would turn Nezuko back into a human, even if he had to kill every demon in this galaxy to do it. He gripped the handle of his chipped sword. The metal was cold, but his hand was warm. He began the recovery breathing. Tomorrow, the training would begin. The galaxy was vast, and it was cruel, but Tanjiro Kamado was not done yet. The transition from the materium to the immaterium was a sensation of nausea that never truly faded. For 6 months, the strike cruiser Saint's Lament moved through the warp tides. To Tanjiro Kamado, it felt like being underwater in a stagnant pond, filled with watching eyes. He spent his time in the training cages of the mid-deck. Sister Superior Agatha was his instructor. She did not teach him swordplay. She taught him hatred. She taught him the catechisms of the Imperium. She explained that the galaxy was a garden of weeds, and the faithful were the shears. Tanjiro listened, but his heart remained his own. He understood the necessity of defense, but he could not embrace the joy of the purge. He learned Low Gothic rapidly. The language was harsh and blocky, lacking the poetic nuance of his native tongue, but it was efficient for shouting orders over the roar of bolters. The training was physical torture. Agatha had him run laps around the engine deck in full gravity plating while carrying ammo crates. She put him in the sparring ring with arcoflagellants, servitors driven mad by stims, to test his reflexes. Tanjiro did not kill them. He disabled them. He cut the nerve bundles in their wrists or shattered their kneecaps with the flat of his blade. This infuriated Agatha. She called him weak. She told him that mercy was a crack in the armor where the enemy would insert a knife. Tanjiro argued that a dead enemy could not repent, but he quickly learned that in the 41st millennium, repentance was only found in death. During the long transit, Tanjiro was allowed to visit the secure hold where the box was kept. He was never allowed to open it. 2 Celestian sacrosancts with storm shields stood guard at all times. They watched him with suspicion. He would sit by the box and talk to Nezuko in a low voice. He told her about the stars that looked wrong. He told her about the metal men and the soldiers who knew no fear. He smelled her scent through the wood. It was calm. She was dormant, conserving energy. The warp storms outside the ship sometimes made the box rattle, the wood groaning as if the thing inside was reacting to the psychic pressure. Tanjiro would place his hand on the lid and breathe, projecting a sense of calm. The sisters watching him would tighten their grip on their power maws, unsure if he was praying or casting a hex. The alarm klaxons broke the routine. They were not the rhythmic pulses of a drill. They were the screaming, discordant sirens of a combat drop. The ship shuddered as it translated back into real space. The Geller field disengaged with a snap that Tanjiro felt in his teeth. He ran to the armory. The sisters were already gearing up. The mood was different this time. There was no eager anticipation. There was a grim, heavy silence. Canoness Verity stood on the command pulpit. She did not look at her troops. She looked at the tactical hololith. The target was Avaris, a hive world in the subsector. A distress signal had been received 3 weeks ago. It was a code vermilion. Biological hazard. Unsanctioned mutation. The planet had stopped paying its tithes. The Saints' Lament had been diverted to investigate, and if necessary, enact the culling. Tanjiro did not know what the culling was. He asked Sister Domenica as he strapped on his flag vest. She did not look at him. She checked the charge on her melter gun. She told him it meant they were not there to save the population. They were there to stop what was killing them from leaving the planet. The drop was unlike the assault on Ophiochus Gamma. There was no anti-aircraft fire. The city below was silent. Avaris was a vertical nightmare, a spire of ferrocrete and plasteel that pierced the clouds. It housed 20 billion souls. As the Thunderhawks descended, Tanjiro looked out the viewport. The city was covered in a thick yellow fog. It was not industrial smog. It moved with a purpose. It curled around the spires like fingers. Tanjiro smelled it before the ramp even opened. It was a scent that made his stomach turn. It was the smell of old meat, sweet rot, and flies. It was the smell of a wound that had gone gangrenous. They landed on the landing pad of Hive Secundus, midway up the spire. The wind howled, carrying the yellow fog. The canoness ordered full respirators. Tanjiro pulled his mask tight. The air filters clicked, scrubbing the toxins. The squad moved out. The landing pad was deserted. Cargo haulers sat abandoned, crates of food rotting on the deck. There were no bodies, just clothes. Piles of robes, uniforms, and work boots lay on the ground as if the people inside them had simply dissolved. Squad Domenica took point. They moved into the main concourse. It was a cavernous hall lined with statues of planetary governors. The statues were defaced. Green slime dripped from their eyes. The walls were covered in strange, 3-circle symbols daubed in filth. Tanjiro traced the shape with his eyes. It made him feel sick. The geometry was wrong. It was a symbol of decay. The Auspex scanners were useless. The spores in the air clogged the sensors with ghost readings. They had to rely on eyes and ears. Tanjiro stopped. He raised a hand. Domenica halted the squad. She looked at him. He pointed to a ventilation grate 50 meters ahead. He touched his nose. He smelled something. It was not the sweet rot. It was the copper tang of fresh blood and the wet sound of chewing. Domenica signaled the heavy bolter team. They set up a field of fire. The grate burst open. They did not come out like soldiers. They spilled out like water. Hundreds of them. They were human once. Now they were poxwalkers. Their skin was green and grey, bubbling with boils. Horns made of bone jutted from their skulls. Their mouths were distended, filled with jagged teeth. They groaned, a sound that was half laughter, half sobbing. They saw the sisters and surged forward. They were slow, shambling, but there were so many. "Purge the unclean," Domenica screamed. The bolters opened up. The hallway lit up with muzzle flashes. The mass reactive shells tore into the mob. Bodies exploded in showers of pus and bone. But the poxwalkers did not stop. They did not feel pain. A creature with its legs blown off crawled forward, dragging its entrails, trying to bite the boots of the sisters. Tanjiro drew his sword. He stepped into the firing line. He used the third form, flowing dance. He moved through the horde, his blade a blur. He aimed for the necks. The poxwalkers were soft. Their bones were rotten. The blade passed through them easily, but for every one he cut down, 3 more took its place. He realized with horror that the piles of clothes on the landing pad were not from dissolved people. These were the people. The population of the hive was not dead. They were this. A poxwalker lunged at him. It wore the tattered dress of a noblewoman. It had a pearl necklace fused into the flesh of its neck. Tanjiro hesitated for a fraction of a second. He saw the human eyes buried in the monster's face. In that moment of hesitation, the creature grabbed his arm. Its grip was iron. It tried to vomit bile onto his face. Tanjiro kicked it away, disgust warring with pity. He decapitated it. He realized then that he could not save them. There was no cure for this. The realization hit him harder than the physical blow. In his world, a demon was a tragedy. Here, the tragedy was the baseline existence. The squad fell back to a defensible junction. The pile of dead poxwalkers created a barricade. The sisters used flamers to clear the corpses. The smell of burning rotten meat filled the hallway. It was unbearable. Tanjiro retched behind his mask. Sister Viridian, the Hospitaller, checked him for bites. She found none. She told him to focus. This was only the outer layer of the infection. The mission objective was the primary air exchange shrine. The tech priests on the ship had determined that the plague was being aerosolized through the ventilation system. If they could shut down the giant fans in the center of the hive, they could stop the spread to the upper spires where the nobility and the planetary defense forces were holding out. They had to descend 20 levels. The descent was a journey into hell. As they went deeper, the corruption grew worse. The metal walls of the hive were covered in a fleshy growth that pulsed like a heartbeat. Eyes grew out of the steel. Mouths formed on the floor and whispered secrets as the sisters walked over them. The sisters recited litanies to drown out the whispers. Tanjiro used his breathing. He focused on the sound of his own blood. He kept his mind clear. On level 40, they found the survivors. A group of Planetary Defense Force soldiers had barricaded themselves in a munitions depot. They were starving, terrified, and half mad. Their commissary officer had shot himself. The soldiers aimed their laser guns at the sisters, screaming that they were hallucinations. Domenica stepped forward. She did not offer comfort. She ordered them to stand down and submit to genetic testing. The soldiers refused. One of them, a boy no older than Tanjiro, was shaking. He had a black spot on his neck. Tanjiro saw it. He smelled the rot on the boy. It was faint, but it was there. The boy was infected. Domenica saw Tanjiro's reaction. She knew what it meant. She raised her bolter. Tanjiro stepped in front of her. He spoke in broken Gothic. He said the boy was still lucid. He said they could quarantine him. Domenica struck Tanjiro with the butt of her weapon. She knocked him aside. She told him that hope was the first step on the road to disappointment. She shot the boy. The other soldiers screamed and opened fire. The sisters returned fire. In 3 seconds, the survivors were dead. Tanjiro stood over the body of the boy. He felt a rage building in his chest. It was not the hot fire of battle. It was a cold, bitter anger. He looked at Domenica. She did not look away. She told him that if he hesitated again, she would shoot him herself. She said that a single carrier could infect 1 billion people. She asked him if his pity was worth a world. Tanjiro had no answer. He knew she was right according to the logic of this place, and that made him hate this place even more. They reached the air exchange shrine 3 hours later. It was a massive chamber, kilometers wide. Huge fans the size of city blocks spun slowly in the gloom. The air was thick with green smog. In the center of the chamber, suspended over the main intake, was a ritual circle. 7 tall figures stood there. They were space marines, but they were swollen and grotesque. Their armor was rusted and cracked, leaking slime. They were the Death Guard. Traitor Astartes dedicated to Nurgle, the plague god. They were chanting. A bell tolled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in Tanjiro's bones. The sound made the bile rise in his throat. In the center of the circle, a rift was opening. A garden was visible on the other side. A garden of decaying flowers and swamp water. They were not just spreading a disease. They were pulling the planet into the Garden of Nurgle. Canoness Verity signaled the attack. There was no time for strategy. They had to break the circle. The sisters charged across the gantry. The Death Guard stopped chanting. They turned slowly. They did not run. They did not take cover. They simply walked forward, firing their bolters. The bolter rounds were explosive, but they were also toxic. Where they hit, metal corroded and flesh liquefied. Tanjiro ran. He was faster than the sisters. He was faster than the heavy bolter shells. He aimed for the leader, a sorcerer with a staff made of a spine. The sorcerer saw him. The giant laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. He pointed a finger. A stream of insects erupted from his gauntlet. They were flesh-borer flies. They swarmed Tanjiro. Tanjiro switched techniques. 4th form, striking tide. He spun his body, his sword creating a vortex of air. He slashed the air itself, cutting the wings off the flies. He broke through the swarm. He reached the sorcerer. He struck. The blade hit the sorcerer's shoulder. It sank in, but there was no blood, only pus. The sorcerer didn't even flinch. He backhanded Tanjiro. The blow was like being hit by a train. Tanjiro flew across the gantry. He smashed into a control console. His ribs cracked. He coughed blood. The pain was blinding. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't work. The sorcerer walked toward him. The giant raised his staff. He spoke in a voice that sounded like shifting gravel. He told Tanjiro that his struggle was sweet. He said that Nurgle loved him. He said that all things must rot, and Tanjiro would make a beautiful compost. Domenico arrived. She fired her melter gun at point-blank range. The beam hit the sorcerer in the chest. It should have vaporized him. Instead, the heat washed over the rotten armor and dissipated. The sorcerer turned and grabbed Domenico by the throat. He lifted her off the ground. Her armor creaked. She stabbed him with her combat knife, driving it into his eye lens. He ignored it. He squeezed. There was a wet crunch. Domenico went limp. He threw her body into the fan blades below. Tanjiro watched her fall. He felt a snap in his mind. The rage he had suppressed exploded. He forced his body to move. He forced the broken ribs to knit together with muscle control. He breathed, total concentration. Dragon of change. He modified the form. He didn't just flow, he burned. He visualized the sun. He visualized the Hinokami Kagura, the memory of his father dancing in the snow. His sword did not catch fire. There was no magic here for him. But the friction of the blade against the air created a heat shimmer. He moved. He was faster than before. He was desperate. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the joints, the seals, the breathing tubes. He severed the sorcerer's connection to the warp. He cut the staff in half. The sorcerer roared in annoyance. The other sisters were dying. The Death Guard was slaughtering them. The mission was failing. The rift was widening. Something was coming through. A great unclean one. A mountain of fat and filth was pushing itself through the tear in reality. If it entered, the planet was lost. Canoness Verity saw it. She was bleeding from a head wound. She looked at the main control pillar of the air exchange. It was a fusion reactor that powered the fans. She looked at Tanjiro. She tapped her comms bead. "Overload protocol," she whispered. "Deny the enemy." She was going to blow the reactor. It would destroy the hive spire. It would kill millions. But it would close the rift. "Get out," she screamed at Tanjiro. "Take the survivors and get out." Tanjiro looked at the reactor. He looked at the Canoness. He looked at the Death Guard. He realized he could not win this fight. Not like this. He grabbed the nearest surviving sister, a young girl named Lucina, who had lost an arm. He threw her over his shoulder. He ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. He ran up the maintenance shafts. He ran as the reactor began to whine. The explosion was not a fireball. It was a collapse of gravity and heat. The bottom of the hive spire vanished. The shockwave raced upward. Tanjiro outran the floor, falling away beneath him. He leaped from gantry to gantry. The Death Guard was swallowed by the fire. The rift snapped shut with a psychic scream that made Tanjiro's nose bleed. He reached the upper levels just as the structural integrity failed. The entire spire listed to the side. The landing pad where the Thunderhawk waited was tilting at a 45-degree angle. The pilot was revving the engines, trying to hold position. Tanjiro sprinted across the tilting deck. He threw Sister Lucina into the open ramp. He scrambled up after her. The ramp closed. The Thunderhawk boosted away just as Hive Secundus collapsed. Tanjiro sat on the metal floor of the gunship. He panted. His lungs burned. The air in the ship was clean, but he could still smell the rot. He looked around. Out of a squad of 20, only 4 had returned. Domenica was dead. Verity was dead. The mission was a success. The rift was closed, but 20 billion people had just been buried under a mountain of rubble. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had saved Lucina. He had saved the box, which was safe on the ship in orbit. But he felt a crushing weight. He had seen the face of the enemy. It wasn't just monsters. It was a fundamental force of the universe. Decay, despair. How could he fight that with a sword? The pilot's voice crackled over the fox. Returning to Saint's Lament. Prepare for decontamination. Decontamination. They would burn his clothes. They would scrub his skin with acid. They would pray over him. But they couldn't scrub the memory of the boy with the black spot. They couldn't scrub the sound of Domenica's neck breaking. When they landed on the cruiser, the reception was cold. There were no cheers. The loss of a canoness was a grave blow. Sister Agatha met them at the bay. She looked at the survivors. She looked at Tanjiro. She did not ask what happened. She knew. She handed him a data slate. "New orders," she said. "From the Inquisition." Tanjiro looked at the slate. He couldn't read the high-level cipher. "We are not going to Ophelia 7, Agatha said. "An Inquisitor has heard reports of your efficiency against the warp. He demands inspection. We are to rendezvous with the Black Ship." The silent judge. A black ship. The ships that collected psychers to feed the Emperor. The ships of the Inquisition. Tanjiro felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. He had survived the plague, but now he was going to face the judgment of the most paranoid organization in human history, and he had a demon in a box. He walked to the secure hold. The guards let him pass. He sat by the box. He didn't speak this time. He just leaned his head against the wood. He was tired, so tired, but he couldn't rest. The smell of danger was stronger than ever. The catastrophe on the surface was over, but the catastrophe for him was just beginning. He checked his sword. The edge was dull. He would need a whetstone. He began the recovery breathing. He would be ready. He had to be. The rendezvous point was in the deep void between the stars, a region of space known as the Anchorit's Grief. There were no planets here, only dust and the cold silence of the interstellar gulf. The strike cruiser Saint's Lament drifted alongside a vessel that dwarfed it. The black ship, the Silent Judge, was a floating fortress of obsidian and iron. It was 5 kilometers long, a cathedral of incarceration designed to transport the most dangerous resource in the Imperium: unprotected souls. The hull was covered in hexagrammic wards and signal dampeners. It absorbed light. Looking at it made Tanjiro's eyes water, as if his brain refused to process the sheer concentrated malice of the structure. More Sister Superior Agatha stood on the shuttle deck of the strike cruiser. She had polished her armor, but the scratches from the Hive World campaign remained. She looked diminished. In the hierarchy of the Imperium, a Sister of Battle commanded respect, but an Inquisitor commanded fear. Tanjiro stood beside her. He wore the clean grey fatigues of a naval armsman, but they fit him poorly. His power sword, the chipped blade he had carried through the burning of Hive Secundus, was sheathed at his hip. The wooden box was on his back. He had refused to let the servitors carry it. The shuttle flight was short and silent. The pilot did not speak. The interior of the shuttle smelled of recycled air and old incense. When they docked with the black ship, the gravity changed. It felt heavier, oppressive. The airlocks cycled open with a groan of tortured metal. A squad of inquisitorial stormtroopers waited for them. They wore carapace armor of matte black with red lenses. They held hell guns, weapons connected by power cables to backpack generators. They did not salute. They simply pointed down the corridor. Tanjiro walked. He kept his breathing steady. The air inside the black ship was thick with the scent of terror. It was not the fresh, sharp fear of a battlefield. It was the stale, hopeless fear of a dungeon. He could smell thousands of people. They were kept in cells that lined the lower decks. Psychers, witches, mutants, people who had been born with a gift they did not ask for and were now being taken to terror to be fed to the Golden Throne. Their psychic screams were inaudible to normal ears, but to Tanjiro, who smelled emotions, the ship stank of misery. It was a smell like sulfur and rotting onions. They were led to a strategium near the bridge. The room was circular, dominated by a holographic map of the sector. Standing at the table was Inquisitor Silas Vane. He was a man of indeterminate age. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretching tight over a skull that seemed too large for his face. He wore a high-collared coat of crimson leather and a rosette of office around his neck. One of his hands was a bionic claw, the metal tarnished and scratched. Behind him floated a servo skull that had been fashioned from the head of a Xenos creature, likely a Tau, its single eye lens blinking red. Agatha knelt. Tanjiro did not. He bowed low, a waist-hinged movement that confused the stormtroopers. Inquisitor Vane did not look up from the hololith. He moved a marker on the map with his claw. The marker represented a fleet movement. "Report," Vane said. His voice was dry, like paper rubbing against stone. Agatha recited the events of Ophiuchus Gamma and Hive Secundus. She spoke of the rift, the demons, the plague, and the closing of the warp tear. She spoke with the precision of a soldier. She did not embellish. When she reached the part about Tanjiro, she paused. She described his speed, his resistance to the warp, and his ability to kill entities that should have been immune to physical damage. Vane stopped moving the markers. He looked up. His eyes were black. The irises expanded to swallow the whites. He looked at Tanjiro. He did not look at the boy's face. He looked at the box on his back. "Subject," Vane said. "Step forward." Tanjiro stepped forward. He smelled the Inquisitor. He expected to smell malice or sadism. Instead, he smelled ink, dust, and a cold, mathematical ruthlessness. There was no emotion in Silas Vane. There was only duty. This was a man who would burn 1 billion children to save 1,000,001. The Inquisitor gestured to a figure standing in the shadows. A woman stepped forward. She was blindfolded, her mouth sewn shut with silver wire. She was a sanctioned psyker, a telepath bound to the Inquisitor's will. Vane gave a mental command. The psyker raised her hands toward Tanjiro. Tanjiro felt a pressure in his head. It was like a finger poking at his brain. The psyker was trying to read him. She was trying to find the taint of chaos. In the grim darkness of the far future, if something was powerful, it was usually because of the warp. Vane needed to know if Tanjiro was a sorcerer. Tanjiro did not resist. He had nothing to hide. He focused on his breathing. He thought of his family. He thought of the charcoal kiln. He thought of the sun rising over the mountain. The mental image was bright, warm, and pure. The psyker gasped. The sound tore through the stitches in her lips. She staggered back, clutching her head. Blood ran from her nose. She fell to her knees, shaking. Vane looked at her, then back at Tanjiro. The Inquisitor's expression did not change, but the smell of curiosity spiked. "Interesting," Vane said. "You are not a blank. The witch can see you, but she cannot touch you. Your mind burns." He walked around the table, his metal claw clicking against the slate edge. He stopped in front of Tanjiro. He pointed the claw at the box. "Open it," Vane commanded. Tanjiro stiffened. He shook his head. He said, in his broken Gothic, that it was his sister. She was sick. She needed to sleep. The stormtroopers raised their hellguns. The hum of the power packs filled the room. Agatha stood up, her hand drifting toward her bolter, then stopping. To draw a weapon on an Inquisitor was heresy. Vane did not repeat the order. He simply nodded to the troopers. 2 of them stepped forward to seize the box. Tanjiro moved. He did not draw his sword. He pivoted, grabbing the barrel of the first hellgun and twisting it. The trooper was thrown off balance. Tanjiro swept the legs of the second trooper. He moved back, placing himself between the soldiers and the wall. He adjusted the straps of the box. His eyes were hard. Agatha shouted at him to stand down. Tanjiro ignored her. He smelled the intent of the soldiers. They were going to break the box. He would not allow it. Vane raised his hand. The troopers froze. The Inquisitor looked at Tanjiro with a new calculation. He had seen the speed. It was not enhanced by power armor. It was biological. "You protect the container," Vane observed. "It contains a warp entity. I can smell the ozone. Yet you are not corrupted. You fight demons. This is a paradox." Before Vane could order the execution, the ship lurched. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency red strobes. A siren began to wail. It was not the alarm for a warp breach. It was the alarm for a boarding action. The Voxcaster on the wall crackled. "Bridge to Inquisitor. Contact. Multiple contacts." They were running silent. "No heat signature. Biologicals. We have hull breaches on decks 12, 14, and 20. Vane looked at the hololith. New markers appeared. There were red swarms. They were surrounding the black ship. "Tyranids," Vane said. "A splinter fleet. They are drawn to the psychic beacon of the prisoners." The strategic situation had shifted in an instant. The interrogation was over. Survival was now the primary objective. The Tyranids were the great devourer. They did not want to conquer. They wanted to eat. The thousands of psychers in the hold were a dinner bell ringing across the void. "Secure the strategium," Vane ordered. Tanjiro smelled them before he saw them. The smell was acid and chitin. It was a dry, insectoid scent that triggered a primal fear in the human brain. The ventilation grates in the ceiling buckled. Metal tore like paper. Creatures dropped into the room. They were genestealers, 4 armed horrors with claws hard enough to shear through Terminator armor. They moved with a disturbing fluidity. There were 6 of them. The stormtroopers opened fire. The hell guns fired laser beams that punched holes in the chitin. But the genestealers were fast. They closed the distance in a heartbeat. A trooper screamed as a claw removed his head. Another was impaled and lifted into the air. Agatha drew her bolter and fired, blowing the leg off one creature, but it kept crawling, dragging itself forward with its upper claws. Tanjiro breathed. Total concentration. Water breathing. First form. Water surface. Slash. He drew his chipped power sword. He did not aim for the body. He aimed for the limbs. He severed the claws of the nearest genestealer. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched sound that hurt the ears. Tanjiro spun, decapitating it. Vayne was calm. He drew a plasma pistol. He fired with precise robotic movements. A blue sun exploded in the chest of a genestealer, but another one dropped from the vent directly behind him. It raised its claws to strike. Tanjiro saw the thread. He launched himself off the tactical table. He tackled the Inquisitor, knocking the old man to the ground. The claws missed Vayne's head by inches, sparking against the floor. Tanjiro rolled, bringing his sword up. He stabbed the creature through the bottom of its jaw, driving the blade into its brain. He stood up, pulling Vayne to his feet. The Inquisitor looked at his ruined coat, then at Tanjiro. "You are useful," Vayne said. The attack on the Stratagem was just the beginning. The black ship was being consumed from the inside out. The Tyranids had boarded in force. They were hunting the psychers in the cells. If they consumed that much biomass and psychic potential, the splinter fleet would grow strong enough to threaten the entire subsector. Vayne made a decision. He accessed the console. "We must purge the cargo," he said. Agatha looked at him in horror. He meant to kill the prisoners, all of them. "If the Tyranids eat them, the system dies," Vayne stated. "If we vent the atmosphere in the lower decks, the biomass is denied. It is the logical choice." He began the sequence, but the console sparked and died. A claw had severed the logic cables under the floor. The ship's machine spirit was screaming. The controls were dead. "We have to go to the engineering deck," Vayne said. "We must manually override the venting protocols." The journey to engineering was a running battle. The corridors of the black ship were a slaughterhouse. Stormtroopers fought desperate last stands at bulkheads. Servitors were torn apart, their mechanical parts scattered among the gore. The lighting was intermittent, casting long, dancing shadows that hid the predators. Tanjiro fought at the front. His sword was losing its edge. The hyper-dense carapace of the Tyranids was harder than steel. He had to use more breath, more force to cut. His lungs burned. The fatigue of the last few months was catching up to him. He was hungry. He was thirsty. But he could not stop. They reached a junction near the central elevator. A lictor was waiting. It had chameleon skin, blending perfectly with the pipes and wires of the wall. It struck without warning. Its feeder tendrils lashed out, grabbing Agatha. She was lifted off her feet. The creature prepared to feed on her brain to absorb her memories. Tanjiro screamed. He switched forms. Second form. Water wheel. He jumped, spinning vertically. He severed the tendrils. Agatha fell, gasping. The lictor hissed and turned its attention to Tanjiro. It was huge, towering over him. It was a specialized hunter designed to kill commanders. Tanjiro parried a blow that would have smashed a tank. His sword vibrated. A hairline fracture appeared in the metal. The lictor struck again and again. Tanjiro was pushed back. He was fast, but the lictor was faster. It anticipated his moves. It was learning. A claw grazed Tanjiro's chest. Blood sprayed. He stumbled. The lictor raised its scything talons for the kill. Suddenly, the box on Tanjiro's back burst open. The wood shattered. Nezuko did not step out. She launched herself. She had grown. Her body was that of an adult now, a transformation triggered by the threat to her brother. Her horn jutted from her forehead. Vine-like patterns covered her skin. She kicked the lictor in the head. The impact sounded like a thunderclap. The lictor's skull cracked. It staggered back, confused. It had not smelled her. To the Tyranid senses, she was not biomass. She was something else, something wrong. Nezuko landed in front of Tanjiro. She hissed, her bamboo muzzle gone, discarded in the box. Her eyes were slit pupils. She raised her hand, blood ignited. Blood demon art. Exploding blood. Her blood, which had splattered on the lictor during the kick, detonated. Pink flames engulfed the monster. The fire did not just burn. It consumed. It burned the biological bonds of the Tyranid organism. The lictor shrieked as its camouflage skin boiled away. It thrashed, trying to extinguish the flames, but the fire was supernatural. It burned until there was nothing left but ash. The hallway fell silent. Agatha stared at Nezuko. The stormtroopers raised their weapons. A demon, a mutant, the enemy. Tanjiro scrambled up. He hugged Nezuko from behind. He whispered to her. He begged her to calm down. He used the recovery breathing to project calm. Nezuko panted, her claws digging into the floor plates. Slowly, she began to shrink. The horn receded. The vines faded. She slumped into Tanjiro's arms, a small girl again, sleeping. Inquisitor Van watched this. He did not raise his pistol. He looked at the pile of ash that used to be a lictor. He looked at the pink flames that were fading without leaving scorch marks on the metal floor. Fire that burns the enemy but not the ship, Vane murmured. A weapon that operates outside the laws of physics. He looked at Tanjiro, who was shielding his sister, waiting for the execution order. The mission is not over, Vane said. Trooper Kamado, can she do that again? Tanjiro looked at the Inquisitor. He realized Vane was not going to shoot. Not yet. She is tired, Tanjiro said. She needs to sleep. Then you will have to do, Vane said. Move. They reached engineering. The blast doors were sealed. A broodlord, the alpha of the Genestealers, was tearing at the metal with claws that glowed with psychic energy. It was surrounded by a pack of 20 Genestealers. They were trying to get to the reactor to consume the radioactive fuel. We cannot win this, Agatha said. She checked her magazine. She had 33 bolts left. Vane looked at the broodlord. Even he, with his plasma pistol, could not take that beast. We do not need to kill them, Vane said. We need to reach the override console on the other side of the room. We need a distraction. He looked at Tanjiro. You are the distraction, Vane said. It was a death sentence. Tanjiro knew it. To charge a broodlord was suicide. But if he didn't, the Tyranids would eat the prisoners, grow stronger, and destroy the sector. And then they would eat Nezuko. Tanjiro tightened his grip on his fractured sword. He looked at Nezuko, who was being held by a reluctant Agatha. Protect her, Tanjiro said to the sister. Agatha nodded. Protocol dictated she burn the witch, but honor dictated she protect the comrade who had saved her life. Tanjiro took a deep breath. He filled his lungs until they felt like they would burst. He didn't use water breathing. It wasn't enough. He remembered the dance, the Hinokami Kagura, dance of the fire god, waltz. He charged. He did not run in a straight line. He moved in arcs. The Genestealers leapt at him. He cut them down. His sword was dull, so he used momentum. He didn't cut. He smashed through them. He reached the Broodlord. The beast roared. It swiped with its lightning claws. Tanjiro ducked. The air above his head crackled with energy. He slashed at the beast's legs. The blade bounced off the iron-hard chitin. The Broodlord grabbed him. It lifted him up. It opened its maw to bite his head off. Tanjiro headbutted it. The sound was sickening. The Broodlord was stunned. Tanjiro's forehead was harder than the Tyranid's carapace. In that second of confusion, Tanjiro drove his sword into the creature's open mouth. He pushed. The blade went up into the brain. The Broodlord bit down. The power sword shattered. The shards of metal tore through Tanjiro's cheek. But the beast was dead. It collapsed, crushing Tanjiro under its massive weight. Vayne ran to the console. He keyed the override. Purge sequence active, the machine spirit intoned. Vents opened on the prisoner decks. Atmosphere rushed out into the void. Thousands of prisoners died instantly, their lungs rupturing. But the Tyranids feasting on them died too. The biomass froze. The food source was gone. The remaining Tyranids in the engineering bay shrieked. The hive mind connection was disrupted by the sudden loss of the other bioforms. They hesitated. The stormtroopers poured fire into them. Agatha pulled Tanjiro from under the corpse of the Broodlord. He was covered in alien ichor and his own blood. His face was slashed. His ribs were crushed. But he was breathing. The threat was contained. The black ship was damaged, drifting, but alive. Hours later, in the medical bay, Vayne stood over Tanjiro's bed. The boy was healing, but slowly. The Tyranid toxin in his system was fighting his recovery. Agatha stood by the door. The box was in the corner, repaired with plasteel sheets. "You have a dilemma, Inquisitor," Agatha said. "He harbors a Xenos hybrid warp entity. Protocol demands, protocol is a guideline for the unimaginative," Vayne interrupted. He tapped his metal claw on the bed rail. "The cicatrix maledictum has split the galaxy. We are losing. The guard is broken. The Astartes are stretched thin. We are fighting a war of attrition against infinity." He looked at the box. "I saw a creature that burns biomass with warp fire, but does not corrupt the material world. I saw a boy who acts as a reality anchor, immune to psychic assault. These are not heresies. They are assets." He turned to Agatha. "You will report that the prisoner died in the Tyranid assault." Agatha stiffened. "You ask me to lie to the ecclesiarchy." "I ask you to serve the Emperor," Vayne said. "The Inquisition requires agents who can go where we cannot. Agents who can walk into the warp and not blink." He looked back at Tanjiro. "He is not a sister servant anymore. He belongs to the Order Hereticus. I will bind him. I will sanction the creature. And if they betray us, I will kill them. But until then," Vayne smiled, a rare, skeletal expression. "Until then, we have a demon hunter who hunts demons." Tanjiro opened his eyes. He saw the Inquisitor. He smelled the ambition. He smelled the lies. But he also smelled the only path that kept Nezuko alive. He tried to speak. Vayne held up a hand. "Rest, Acolyte Kamado. You have a lot of work to do. We are going to the Ghoul Stars. There is a Necron dynasty waking up, and I want to see if your sister's fireworks on living metal." Tanjiro closed his eyes. The strategic chain reaction had occurred. He had survived the battle, but he had lost his freedom. He was no longer a lost soul trying to find a cure. He was a weapon in the arsenal of the Inquisition, and the 41st Millennium had many, many wars left to fight. The Ghoul Stars were a region of space that the Imperium tried to forget. The stars here were old and dim, shedding a pale, sickly light that offered no warmth. The void shields of the Silent Judge shimmered constantly, reacting to the background radiation of dead civilizations. Inquisitor Silas Vayne had brought them here for a specific purpose. He was hunting a resource that was more valuable than gold or lives. He was hunting Blackstone. The anti-psychic mineral was the only thing that could hold back the Great Rift. Vane believed a deposit existed on the dead world of Moria Secundus. Tanjiro Kamado stood in the armory of the Black Ship. He was sharpening his sword. It was a new blade, gifted to him by Vane. It was a force sword, a weapon used by librarians and inquisitors. It was made of psychoconductive crystal interlaced with steel. Tanjiro could not use psychic powers to activate the energy field, but the material was incredibly durable and light. It responded to his breathing. When he used total concentration, the blade hummed, resonating with his physical biorhythm. He had also been given carapace armor, painted the deep crimson of the Inquisition. He looked like a soldier now. He looked like a killer. The mission briefing was short. They were to drop onto the planet's surface, infiltrate a structure detected by the ship's deep scan, secure a sample of the Blackstone, and extract. Stealth was absolute. If they were detected, they would die. The planet was not empty. It was a tomb world. The Necrons slumbered beneath the surface. They were ancient machines that had conquered the galaxy 60 million years ago. They did not feel fear. They did not feel pain. They simply eradicated. Tanjiro strapped the box to his back. Vane had argued against bringing Nezuko. He said she was a variable they could not control. Tanjiro had refused to leave her. He argued that if the mission went wrong, they would need her fire. Vane had acquiesced, but only because he calculated that Tanjiro fought harder when the girl was threatened. Sister Agatha accompanied them. She carried a heavy flamer now. She spoke little to Tanjiro. She respected his skill, but she feared what he represented. They dropped in a stealth shuttle. It glided through the thin atmosphere like a shadow. The surface of Moria Secundus was a wasteland of black sand and obsidian spires. The temperature was minus 100 degrees. Tanjiro's breath misted inside his helmet. He used the recovery breathing to keep his body temperature up. The cold was biting, seeking to freeze the blood in his veins. They landed 2 kilometers from the target structure. It was a black pyramid, smooth and seamless, rising from the desert floor. There were no guards. The Necrons relied on silence and the assumption that no one was foolish enough to come here. The squad moved out. Vane led the way, checking a handheld auspex that clicked softly. 6 inquisitorial stormtroopers formed a perimeter. Tanjiro walked close to Vane, his hand on his sword. He tried to smell the enemy. He smelled nothing. That was the most terrifying thing. Even the Tyranids had a smell, musk and acid. The Necrons had no scent. They were a void in the sensory world. It was like walking into a painting of a graveyard. The sand crunched under their boots. The wind howled through the obsidian spires, sounding like lost souls. They reached the entrance of the pyramid. It was sealed. Vane produced a device, a code breaker he had recovered from a dig site on Mars. He attached it to the wall. The device chattered in binary. Minutes passed. The tension was physical. Every second they stood in the open was a risk. Finally, the wall dissolved. It didn't open. The nanobots that made up the stone simply parted, creating a doorway. They entered. The interior was lit by a faint green glow that came from everywhere and nowhere. The architecture was impossible. Hallways defied gravity. Stairs led to ceilings. It was a tomb designed by a mind that did not think like a human. Vane navigated the maze with a map he had seemingly memorized from forbidden texts. They descended deep into the earth. They found the central chamber. In the center, suspended in a stasis field, was a shard of black stone the size of a tank. It pulsed with a negative energy that made Tanjiro feel nauseous. It was pushing against his soul. It was silence made solid. Vane's eyes glittered. This shard alone could shield a fortress world from demonic incursion. Secure the perimeter, Vane whispered. Initiate extraction protocols. The stormtroopers began to set up gravity lifters to move the shard. Tanjiro patrolled the edge of the room. He saw alcoves lining the walls. Inside each alcove stood a metal skeleton. They were motionless, their heads bowed, weapons held across their chests. There were thousands of them, a legion in stasis. Tanjiro felt a chill. These were not statues. They were soldiers waiting for a command. He stopped in front of one alcove. The Necron inside was different. It was not a warrior. It was smaller, its armor more ornate. It held a staff rather than a gun. A cryptech, a scientist. But what caught Tanjiro's attention was not the machine, but what lay at its feet. There was a small, withered flower. It was fossilized, stone now, but it had been placed there with care. Someone, or something, had placed a flower at the feet of this machine millions of years ago. Tanjiro knelt. He smelled a faint, lingering trace of sadness. It was impossible. Machines did not feel sadness. But Tanjiro's nose did not lie. He smelled a memory of grief clinging to the stone flower. He reached out. He wanted to touch the flower, to understand. "Don't touch anything," Agatha hissed over the vox. Tanjiro hesitated. He looked at the machine. The green light in its eyes was dark. It was asleep, but the posture was one of mourning. In that moment, Tanjiro made a choice. He did not treat the machine as a threat. He treated it as a person. He bowed. He clasped his hands together and offered a short prayer for the spirit that had placed the flower. It was a small act, a reflexive act of kindness from a boy who had been raised to respect the dead. He stood up. As he did, his scabbard brushed against the edge of the alcove. A small sound, a metallic clink. The sound echoed in the silent chamber. It should have been nothing, but in a Necron tomb, silence was the primary security measure. The green light in the cryptech's eyes flickered. Vane spun around. Movement. The cryptech did not attack. It turned its head. It looked at Tanjiro. It looked at the flower. Then it looked to the shard of blackstone being moved by the stormtroopers. The machine opened its mouth. A sound came out. It was not a scream. It was a sequence of tones, a dial-up screech of ancient data. "Alarm," Vane shouted. "Cut the gravity lifters. We leave now." It was too late. The small choice to pause, to pray, to acknowledge the humanity in the machine, had delayed Tanjiro by 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds allowed the cryptech to wake up, and the cryptech woke the others. The room erupted in green light. The thousands of alcoves lit up. The Legion awoke. "We are compromised," a stormtrooper yelled. Gauss flares opened fire. Green beams of energy that stripped flesh from bone filled the air. A stormtrooper was hit. He didn't fall. He unraveled. His armor, his skin, his muscles. They peeled away layer by layer until there was nothing left but dust. "Defensive formation," Vane ordered. He fired his plasma pistol. The blue sun struck a Necron warrior, melting its chest. The machine fell, but as they watched, the metal began to flow. The damage repaired itself. Reanimation protocols. They were fighting an enemy that refused to stay dead. Tanjiro drew his sword. First form. Water surface. Slash. He severed the head of the nearest warrior. The head rolled away, eyes still glowing. The body kept moving, swinging its bayonet. Tanjiro kicked it back. "We need to retreat," Agatha shouted, unleashing a torrent of promethium fire. The flames washed over the machines. They did not scream. They walked through the fire, their metal bodies glowing red but functioning perfectly. Vane looked at the blackstone shard. He couldn't take it. It was too heavy to move under fire. He had to make a choice. Save the prize or save the team. Vayne was pragmatic. A dead Inquisitor gathered no resources. "Leave the shard," Vayne commanded. "Fall back to the entrance." They ran. They ran through the impossible geometry of the tomb. The Necrons were slow, but they were relentless. They did not rush. They marched in perfect unison, a wall of death that followed them. They reached the grand hallway. At the far end was the exit, but blocking the path was a massive figure. It was 3 meters tall, clad in gold and azure armor. It held a warsith that crackled with emerald lightning. An overlord. The overlord raised his hand. The door behind it sealed shut. There was no escape. The overlord spoke. The translation matrix in Vayne's earbeat screamed as it tried to decode the 60-million-year-old dialect. "Thieves, vermin, you disturb the silence of the Sarikhan." The overlord pointed at Tanjiro. "You, the one who bows to the dead. You have the scent of the Old One's creations, yet you carry a box of the warp. Explain." Vayne stepped forward. "I am Inquisitor Silas Vayne of the Holy Ordos of Terra. We demand passage." The overlord ignored him. It kept its oculars fixed on Tanjiro. "I saw you," the overlord said, its voice grinding like tectonic plates. "You honored the cryptek Amnar. You acknowledged his grief. This is irregular. A vermin that understands honor." Tanjiro stepped forward. He felt the weight of the overlord's presence. It was heavier than the gravity of the black ship. This creature was not just a machine. It was a god of war encased in metal. "I did not know he was your friend," Tanjiro said, his voice echoing in the hall. "I only saw that he was sad." The overlord tilted its head. "Sad. A biological concept. We transcended such things eons ago. And yet," the overlord lowered its warsith, "I am Overlord Zandrik, or I was. My memory engrams are corrupted. I enjoy a duel. If you are a warrior of honor, you will fight me. If you win, you leave. If you lose, I add your skull to my collection." Vayne grabbed Tanjiro's arm. "Do not do this. It is a machine. It will kill you in a microsecond. We should use melter charges to breach the wall." Tanjiro looked at the wall. It was self-repairing nanostone. Melter charges would take too long. The army of warriors was closing in from behind. "I accept," Tanjiro said. The overlord nodded. "Excellent." The hallway cleared. The Necron warriors stopped their advance. They formed a circle. It was the spectator ring. This was not a chaotic melee. It was a ritual. Tanjiro handed the box to Agatha. "Keep her safe," he whispered. He stepped into the center of the ring. He held his sword in a mid-guard stance. He breathed. Total concentration. The overlord moved. It did not charge. It vanished. It used a dimensional oubliette to step through space. It appeared behind Tanjiro, the war sheath swinging for his neck. Tanjiro smelled the ozone shift. He didn't see the attack. He smelled the displacement of air. He dropped low. The scythe passed over his head, shearing a stone pillar in half. Tanjiro spun. Second form. Water wheel. He struck the overlord's hip. The force sword sparked against the living metal. It cut a groove, but the wound closed instantly. The overlord laughed, a metallic static sound. Good. Fast, but weak. The overlord kicked Tanjiro. The blow broke his ribs. Tanjiro flew across the room, slamming into a wall. He coughed blood. The pain was blinding. He stood up. He breathed. The pain receded. "You heal quickly," the overlord noted. "Bioalchemy?" "No. Willpower." The overlord charged. This time, he didn't teleport. He used raw speed. The war scythe was a blur. Tanjiro could barely track it. He parried. His sword chipped. He dodged. The blade grazed his shoulder. He ducked. The blade took a lock of his hair. Tanjiro was losing. He could not damage the enemy. The gap in technology was too vast. He needed more power. He needed the sun. He switched techniques. Hinokami Kagura. Dance of the fire god. His body temperature spiked. His heart rate hit 200 beats per minute. He visualized the fire. Clear blue sky. He leaped. He spun over the war scythe. He came down with a vertical slash. He aimed for the neck cables, the only part that looked flexible. The strike connected. The force sword, empowered by the heat of his breathing, bit deep. It severed the spinal connection. The Overlord's head went limp. The body froze. Tanjiro landed. He panted. Steam rose from his skin. He had won. But the Overlord did not fall. The head snapped back up. The green eyes flared brighter. A fatal blow, the Overlord said. In a biological duel, I would be dead. But I am Necron. The neck repaired itself in seconds. Tanjiro stared. It was impossible. He couldn't win. The Overlord looked at him. However, by the codes of the Sarakan, a strike that severs the spine is a victory. You have demonstrated martial excellence. The Overlord stepped back. He grounded his scythe. You may leave. Take your kin. But leave the stone. The stone belongs to the dynasty. Vayne stepped forward. We need the stone to save Go, the Overlord commanded. Before I rewrite my logic protocols and decide that vermin are not worth the honor. The door behind the Overlord opened. Tanjiro sheathed his sword. He bowed to the Overlord. Thank you, Tanjiro said. The Overlord did not bow back. He stood like a statue, watching them. They ran. They reached the surface. The shuttle was waiting. They boarded and blasted off just as the ground began to shake. From orbit they watched. The Black Pyramid was not just a building. It was the tip of a spear. The entire crust of the planet cracked. Massive structures rose from the earth. Crescent-shaped doom scythe fighters launched into the void. The tomb world was fully awake. Vayne stood on the bridge of the Silent Judge. He watched the tactical display. The planet was lighting up with energy signatures. We failed, Agatha said. We didn't get the stone. Vayne looked at the readings. We woke them up, he said quietly. A fully active tomb world in the Ghoul stars. This will destabilize the entire subsector. The orcs in the nearby system will be purged. The Chaos warbands will be hunted. He looked at Tanjiro. The boy was sitting in the corner, nursing his broken ribs. Nezuko was cleaning the blood off his face. We failed the mission, Vayne said. But we may have inadvertently created a buffer zone. The Necrons hate chaos more than we do. If they are awake, they will fight the Great Rift. He turned to Tanjiro. You bowed to a Xenos, Vayne said. You treated an abomination like an equal. Tanjiro looked up. He didn't fight with hate, Tanjiro said. He fought with rules. Vayne scoffed. Rules are for the victor. But you survived, and you brought us a way out. The Inquisitor turned back to the window. The Necron fleet was deploying. It was a massive armada. The Silent Judge turned its engines and slipped into the warp, fleeing the giant they had just poked. Tanjiro closed his eyes. He felt a deep exhaustion. The small choice to show respect had saved their lives, but it had unleashed a legion of undying machines upon the galaxy. He wondered if that was a good thing. In this universe, it seemed that every act of mercy carried a heavy price. He touched the box. Nezuko was safe. That was the only victory that mattered to him. But as the ship shook in the warp tides, he couldn't help but think of the Overlord. The machine had shown honor. It was a confusing thought. If the monsters had honor, and the humans killed innocents to save themselves, who were the good guys? He stopped thinking. It made his head hurt. He focused on his breathing. He had to get stronger. The next enemy might not have an honor code. Vayne walked over to his desk. He opened a logbook. He began to write. Subject: Tanjiro Kamado. Status: active. Note: subject displays dangerous levels of empathy. Resulted in awakening of Tomb World. Cairn 9. Strategic outcome: mixed. The Necrons are a threat, but they are now a threat to our enemies as well. The boy is a catalyst. Wherever he goes, the status quo breaks. Recommendation: continue field testing. Deploy to the war zone, Armageddon. Vane closed the book. Armageddon. The world of eternal war. Orcs. The green tide. If Tanjiro wanted to find a cure, he would have to find it in the fires of the biggest war in the galaxy. The Inquisitor smiled. He wondered how the boy's breathing technique would fare against a war boss. Tanjiro slept. In his dream, he saw the flower at the cryptech's feet. It bloomed, turning from stone back into a living red spider lily. But as it bloomed, it caught fire, and the fire spread until the whole galaxy was burning. The ash wastes of Armageddon were not a place of silence. Even when the gun stopped, the wind howled through the twisted wreckage of hives and tanks, carrying the screams of the dying. The sky was a permanent bruise of sulfur yellow and choking grey. For Tanjiro Kamado, this world smelled of rusty iron and raw, unwashed aggression. It was the scent of the orcs, the green tide. They were everywhere. The ground shook rhythmically, a planetary heartbeat driven by millions of boots marching in unison. Tanjiro stood on the battlements of Manufactorum 77 Delta. He was no longer the boy in the checkered Haori who had arrived on Ophiuchus Gamma. He wore the carapace armor of an inquisitorial stormtrooper. Though he had stripped the aquila markings from the shoulders, finding them too heavy with a history he did not fully accept, his Force sword, the gift from Inquisitor Vane, hummed at his hip. The blade had been reforged 3 times in the last year. It was currently etched with runes of banishment. On his back, the box remained. It was scarred, patched with adamantium plating, and secured with chains that rattled in the wind. Inquisitor Silas Vane stood beside him. The old man was dying. The campaign in the Ghoul Stars had cost him. Radiation poisoning from the Necron tomb was eating his cells faster than his rejuvenate treatments could repair them. Vane leaned heavily on his cane, watching the horizon. The horizon was moving. A green sea of muscle and scrap metal was rolling toward them. "They are coming," Vane said. His voice was a wet rattle. Tanjiro did not need eyes to know that. He could smell the bloodlust. It was a thick, spicy scent, overwhelming in its simplicity. The orcs did not hate like the Chaos cultists. They did not despair like the Nurgle infected. They loved this. They loved the war. It was a pure, joyful violence that terrified Tanjiro more than the malice of demons. You could not reason with a creature that saw its own death as a funny joke. Behind them, the defenders of the Manufactorum prepared. These were not the terrified planetary defense forces of his first battle. These were the Salamanders, the sons of Vulcan. They were giants in green power armor, their skin charcoal black, their eyes burning red. They moved with a weight and purpose that anchored reality. They were checking their flamers and melter guns. They did not pray for salvation. They checked the fuel pressures. Brother Sergeant Ezekiel walked up to the rampart. He towered over Tanjiro. The Space Marine looked at the boy, then at the box. The Salamanders were unique among the Astartes. They cared about the humans they protected. Ezekiel had seen Tanjiro fight during the defense of Hive Tartarus 2 weeks ago. He had seen the boy move faster than a scout initiate. He had seen the pink fire that burned only the enemy. "The evacuation transports are still loading," Ezekiel rumbled. His voice was like grinding stones. "We need 30 minutes. The greenskins will be here in 10. Vane looked at the sergeant. You will not get 30 minutes. That is a Gargant. Vane pointed a trembling finger. In the distance, rising above the dust clouds, was a walking mountain. It was an Ork Waaagh, a god machine built of scrap and faith. It belched black smoke. Its cannons were the size of starship engines. It was named Gork Stomp by the Orcs, and it was crushing the outer defense lines. If that machine reaches firing range, the transports will be vaporized, Vane said. We must deploy the asset. Tanjiro stiffened. He knew what the asset meant. Vane wanted to unleash Nezuko. No, Tanjiro said. He spoke low Gothic fluently now, his accent rough and clipped like a Cadian shock trooper. The atmosphere is too toxic. If she opens the box, the spores will affect her blood. She might lose control. Vane turned his pale eyes to Tanjiro. It is not a request, Acolyte. If those transports die, the gene seed stored in them dies. The future of the chapter dies. Your sister's comfort is irrelevant against the survival of the Astartes. Ezekiel looked at Tanjiro. He did not order him. The salamanders did not spend lives carelessly. I will hold the line, Tanjiro said. I will buy you the time. Vane laughed, a dry coughing sound. You? Against a Titan? You are good boy, but you are meat. That thing has shields that can stop a turbo laser. I don't need to stop it, Tanjiro said. I just need to blind it. He adjusted the straps of the box. He turned to Ezekiel. Get the people out. Tanjiro vaulted over the wall. He fell 40 meters, landing in a crouch on the ash dunes. He did not run away from the horde. He ran toward it. The orcs saw him. A lone human charging a Waaagh was the funniest thing they had seen all day. A group of boys on war bikes revved their engines and peeled off to run him down. They screamed war cries, firing their twin-linked Dakaguns. The bullets kicked up fountains of ash around Tanjiro. Tanjiro breathed. Total concentration. Constant. The world slowed down. He saw the trajectory of the bullets. He saw the rotation of the tires. He smelled the fuel mix in the engines. Third form, flowing dance. He weaved through the bullet storm. He didn't block. Blocking would shatter his arms against the caliber of Ork weapons. He flowed around the rounds. He passed the first biker. His force sword flashed. He didn't cut the Ork. He cut the front axle of the bike. The wheels sheared off. The bike flipped, catapulting the Ork into the air. Tanjiro used the wreck as a stepping stone, launching himself higher. He landed on the second bike. He kicked the Ork rider in the helmet, cracking the crude iron jaw plate. He took the handlebars. He didn't know how to drive a war bike, but he understood balance. He gunned the throttle. The machine roared, a beast accepting a new master because he was strong enough to hold it. Tanjiro drove directly into the mass of the infantry. He wasn't fighting them. He was using them as cover. The Gargant loomed ahead. It was kilometers tall. Its belly gun was charging, a massive plasma reactor glowing with unstable energy. The Orcs were confused. They tried to shoot him, but they ended up shooting each other. Tanjiro was a blur of motion, riding the bike until it was shot out from under him, then running, jumping from shoulder to shoulder of the knobs in the front ranks. He reached the leg of the Gargant. It was a fortress of rusted plates. Rivets the size of dinner plates held it together. Tanjiro looked up. He had to get to the head. He had to kill the crew. He jumped. He drove his sword into the metal. It sank in. The force sword cut through the scrap like butter. He began to climb. He was an insect climbing a god. Inside the Gargant, the big mech was laughing. He pulled a lever. Steam vented from the hull. Scalding hot vapor blasted Tanjiro. Tanjiro held his breath. He ignored the pain of his skin blistering. He focused on the smell. He smelled the power source. It wasn't just a reactor. There was something else. A prisoner. He reached a hatch halfway up. He cut the hinges. He swung inside. The interior of the Gargant was a nightmare of gears, pistons, and Gretchen slaves running on treadmills. The heat was unbearable. But the smell was stronger here. It was the smell of a psyker. The orcs had a weird boy strapped to the reactor core. They were torturing him, using his psychic distress to power the shields. The weird boy was screaming, his mind vomiting raw warp energy into the machine. Tanjiro ran along the gantry. Orcs attacked him with wrenches and jagged knives. He cut them down without breaking stride. He reached the reactor. The weird boy looked at him. The creature's eyes were glowing green, leaking ectoplasm. "Kill me," the weird boy telepathically screamed. Tanjiro looked at the creature. It was a monster. It had killed thousands, but in this moment it was a victim. Tanjiro raised his sword. Fifth form, blessed rain after the drought. It was a merciful strike. It decapitated the weird boy instantly. The psychic scream cut off. The reactor destabilized. The shield generator whined and died. The Gargant lurched. Outside, on the wall, Vayne saw the shields flicker and fail. "Now!" Vayne screamed into the Vox. The salamanders opened fire. A battery of lascannons, mounted on the manufactorum walls, fired in unison. The beams struck the Gargant's knee joint. Without the shields, the metal could not withstand the heat. The leg melted. The mountain fell. Tanjiro was inside when it tipped. Gravity shifted 90 degrees. He was thrown against the bulkhead. Metal groaned and sheared. The Gargant crashed into the ash waste with the force of a meteor. The impact shockwave flattened the front ranks of the Ork army. Tanjiro lay in the darkness. His left arm was broken. His ribs were powder. He could not move. The smell of leaking plasma filled the air. He was going to die here. He touched the box on his back. It was crushed. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the pain. He rolled over, gasping. He clawed at the remains of the box. Nezuko. The wood fell away. Nezuko was there. She was curled into a ball. She was bleeding. A piece of shrapnel had pierced the box and struck her shoulder, but she was healing. The wound was steaming. She opened her eyes. They were pink and glowing. She looked at Tanjiro. She saw his broken arm. She saw the blood on his face. She made a sound, a low growl that was not human. The hull of the Gargant was ripped open from the outside. A massive hand reached in. It was an Ork warboss. He was clad in mega armor, a walking tank. He saw the survivors. He laughed. "Little humies," the warboss roared. He reached for Nezuko. Tanjiro tried to stand. He couldn't. His legs wouldn't work. "No!" he screamed. Nezuko stood up. She did not grow this time. She stayed small. But the air around her began to distort. The temperature in the wrecked hull spiked. The warboss grabbed her. His power claw closed around her waist. "Burn," Tanjiro whispered. Nezuko screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of rage. Blood demon art, exploding blood. The fire did not come from her blood this time. It came from her very existence. A pillar of pink flame erupted, blasting through the roof of the Gargant. The warboss was engulfed. His mega armor, thick enough to stop a tank shell, began to glow cherry red. The Ork roared in confusion. He wasn't burning physically. His Waaagh energy was burning. The psychic field that protected him was being consumed. The fire spread. It poured out of the wreckage. It flowed over the ash waste like liquid. It hit the Ork horde. The Orks it touched did not die immediately. They stopped fighting. The aggression was burned out of them. The fire consumed the connection to the Gestalt consciousness. They became confused, docile, terrified. Vayne watched from the wall. He saw the pink fire spreading for kilometers. It was impossible. It was a psychic storm of such magnitude that it should have torn a hole in reality. But there were no diamonds. The warp was not breaking through. It was being pushed back. The fire was cauterizing the wound in reality. "It is the anathema's fire," Vane whispered. "It is the fire of the Emperor." He was wrong, but in the 41st millennium, the distinction didn't matter. The battle ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. The Ork army, their leadership crushed, and their psychic momentum broken, routed. The salamanders charged, cleaning up the confused survivors. Brother Sergeant Zekiel found them in the wreckage. Tanjiro was unconscious, holding Nezuko's hand. Nezuko was asleep, her energy spent. Zekiel looked at the girl. He had seen the fire. He knew what the Codex said about witches, but he also knew what he had seen. She had saved the chapter's future. He picked them both up, one in each arm. He carried them back to the lines. 3 days later, Tanjiro woke up in a sterile room. It was not a cell. It was a stateroom on a ship, but it was not the silent judge. The gravity was perfect. The air smelled of ozone and gold. He sat up. His body was healed. He checked his arm. There was no scar. He looked around. Nezuko was sitting in a chair by the viewport, looking out at the stars. She was awake. She had a bamboo muzzle in her mouth again, a new one fashioned from polished plasteel. The door opened. It did not slide. It dissolved into mist and reformed behind the visitor. A figure entered. He was 3 meters tall. He wore armor of auramite gold that shone with an inner light. He wore a high, conical helm with a plume of red horse hair. He carried a guardian spear that crackled with power. A custodian, one of the Emperor's 10,000. Tanjiro had never seen one, but he smelled the authority. It was the smell of absolute, unquestionable certainty. This being did not doubt. It did not fear. It was the perfect creation. Inquisitor Vane was there too, standing in the shadow of the giant. Vane looked worse. He was in a hover chair now, his legs failing. "You are awake," Vane said. Tanjiro looked at the custodian. "Who is this?" "This is Shield Captain Valerian," Vane said. "He has come for you." Valerian removed his helm. His face was noble, ageless, and utterly cold. He looked at Tanjiro as one might look at a particularly interesting biological specimen. "The High Lords of Terror have reviewed the Inquisitor's reports," Valerian spoke. His voice was not loud, but it resonated in Tanjiro's chest. "Events in the Ghoul Stars, the fire on Armageddon. You are an anomaly, Tanjiro Kamado." Tanjiro stood up. He placed himself between the custodian and Nezuko. "She saved you," Tanjiro said. "She is a warp entity," Valerian said. "By the laws of the throne, she must be destroyed." Tanjiro's hand went to his hip. He had no sword. "Peace," Valerian said. He did not move, but the threat of violence vanished from the room. "If I wished her dead, she would be dead. We are practical, above all else. The great rift widens. The light of the Astronomicon flickers. We need weapons." Vane rolled his chair forward. "Here is the offer, Tanjiro. The only offer you will get." Vane held up a data slate. "You will not return to the Imperial Guard. You will not join the Inquisition as a mere acolyte. You are to be remanded to the custody of the talons of the Emperor. You will be taken to Terra." "To Terra?" Tanjiro asked. "To the throne world. Beneath the palace," Valerian corrected. "There are projects. The Sisters of Silence operate there. They are blanks, soulless ones. They can be near your sister without feeding her nature. We believe your sister's fire can be weaponized to purify corrupted gene seed, to cleanse artifacts, perhaps even to heal." Tanjiro felt a spark of hope. "Heal? Can you cure her?" Valerian paused. "The Emperor's knowledge is vast. If a cure exists, it is in the dark cells beneath the palace. But there is a price." "There is always a price," Tanjiro said. He was tired of prices. You will never leave the palace, Valerian said. You will become a shadow keeper. You will guard the things in the dark that must never be released. You will fight in the dungeons where reality is thin. You will serve until you die. And Nezuko, she will be a sanctioned subject. If she remains useful, she lives. If she loses control. Valerian looked at Nezuko. The Sisters of Silence will execute her. Instantly, Tanjiro looked at his sister. She was looking at him with her soft pink eyes. She nodded. She understood. Vayne spoke up. It is this or execution, Tanjiro. The ecclesiarchy has heard rumors of the Saint of Pink Fire. If they find her, they will burn her as a witch and worship her bones. The Custodes are the only ones who can protect her from the church. Tanjiro realized the trap. He had become too visible. He had saved too many people. The Imperium would eat him alive if he stayed in the open. The only safety was in the belly of the beast. He looked at Valerian. Can I bring my sword? We have better swords, Valerian said. Tanjiro shook his head. I like this one. It remembers. Valerian nodded. Acceptable. Tanjiro walked over to Nezuko. He took her hand. It was cold. We accept, Tanjiro said. Valerian replaced his helm. Then prepare. The black ship arrives in 1 hour. You will see the throne, Tanjiro Kamado. Pray that the sight does not blind you. The custodian turned and marched out. Vayne lingered. He looked at Tanjiro with a strange expression. It was almost regret. I will not see you again, Vayne said. I am dying. Tanjiro looked at the old Inquisitor. You used us. You put us in danger. I did, Vayne admitted. And because of that, a Necron dynasty is fighting chaos, and Armageddon still stands. I spent your life to buy the Imperium time. I would do it again. Tanjiro smelled the truth. There was no malice, only the cold arithmetic of survival. I know, Tanjiro said. Rest well, Silas Vayne. Vayne nodded. He rolled his chair out of the room. The door dissolved and reformed. Tanjiro was alone with Nezuko. He looked out the viewport. The fleet of the Indomitus Crusade was gathering. Thousands of ships. A forest of Gothic spires drifting in the void. It was magnificent and it was horrifying. He touched the glass. He was going to the center of the galaxy. He was going to the place where the corpse of a god sat on a throne of gold. He was going to become a jailer of monsters. But he had a job. He had a mission. He looked at Nezuko. I will find a way, he whispered. Even in the dark, I will turn you back. Nezuko patted his head. She made a muffled sound of agreement. Tanjiro closed his eyes. He began the recovery breathing. The air of the ship was sterile, but underneath, he could smell the faint, distant scent of incense and rotting dreams coming from Terra. It was the smell of the future. He opened his eyes. They were hard. They were the eyes of a warrior who had accepted his battlefield. Let's go, Nezuko, he said. They waited for the golden ship to take them into the eternal night. The records of the Ordo Hereticus regarding the incident of the pink flame on Armageddon remain sealed under the highest clearance of the High Lords of Terra. Inquisitor Silas Vayne passed away 3 weeks after the black ship arrived in the Sol system. His official cause of death was listed as acute radiation poisoning contracted during service to the throne. His personal journals, however, were not filed in the archives of the Inquisition. They were confiscated by the Adeptus Custodes. The data slates were taken to the Tower of Hegemon and locked in a vault that has not been opened since. The official history of the Armageddon campaign lists the defeat of the Gargant Stomp as a miraculous lance strike from orbit, attributed to the benevolence of the Emperor. The truth of the boy and the box was carefully excised from history, cut away like a tumor to preserve the sanctity of imperial doctrine. On the world of Armageddon, however, legends are harder to kill than orcs. Among the ash waste nomads and the survivors of the manufactorums, a cult quietly formed. They whispered of the saint of the burning blood, a spirit that could burn away the corruption of the soul without harming the flesh. The ecclesiarchy moved swiftly. Confessors and witch hunters purged 3 hab blocks to silence the rumors. They burned the believers, unaware of the irony that they were using fire to suppress a legend about fire. Yet in the deepest tunnels of the hives, small shrines still exist. They do not hold statues of the emperor. They hold small, crude carvings of a girl with a piece of bamboo in her mouth. The Inquisition hunts these idols relentlessly, fearing that the hope they inspire is a gateway to the warp. Far away in the Ghoul stars, the awakening of the Sautek dynasty did not result in the immediate annihilation of the subsector. Instead, a strange stalemate emerged. Overlord Zandrich, suffering from his eternal engrammatic madness, declared a perimeter of honor around the region. His legions marched not against the Imperium, but against the encroaching tendrils of the Great Rift. He fights the demons with a confused but effective fury, often rambling to his court regarding a duel he once fought with a biological entity of great promise. The Necrons have become an unwitting shield for humanity in that sector, a strategic anomaly that baffles the tacticians of the Segmentum Command. They do not know that the logic of an immortal machine was rewritten by a single act of politeness from a charcoal burner's son. Deep beneath the surface of Holy Terror, in the dark beneath the Imperial Palace, time moves differently. The dark cells are a place where reality is thin and the horrors of the old night are kept in chains. Here, the Shadow Keepers stand their eternal watch. Among them walks a figure who is not a custodian. He wears armor of black auramite, forged to fit a human frame. He carries a sword that hums with a sound like rushing water. He has aged, though slowly, his life extended by the genecraft of the Emperor's geneticists. He is known to the 10,000 as the Anchor. Tanjiro Kamado walks the silent corridors of the dark cells. He does not speak often. His duty is to guard the ward of the unbound, a section of the prison containing entities that feed on despair. The Sisters of Silence walk with him, their null presence keeping the entities dormant. When the containment fields flicker, as they sometimes do when the Astronomicon wavers, Tanjiro does not panic. He breathes. The sound of his breath echoes in the dark, a rhythmic, calming pulse that enforces the laws of physics on creatures that despise them. He fights battles in the dark that no history book will ever record. He slays nightmares that would shatter the minds of space marines. And always, watching from the shadows of the secure vault, is a woman with eyes that glow in the dark. She does not age. She does not sleep. Nezuko Kamado sits in the center of the ultimate confinement, a prisoner and a warden both. She is the final sanction. When a horror escapes that cannot be killed by bolter or blade, the Shadow Keepers step back, and the box is opened. The pink fire burns in the deep earth, a secret light in the darkest place in the galaxy. They are no longer searching for a cure. They have accepted a harder truth. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no going back to the way things were. There is only the duty to hold the line. Tanjiro Kamado did not save his sister in the way he promised, but he kept her safe. And together, in the silence of the throne world, they continue to breathe,